Welcome to the office of the future. Rome is a virtual office that lets everyone in your company work as if you were in one room, but from anywhere. So collaboration is super fast, productivity is super high, and meetings last on average just 8 minutes long. Now, speaking of 8, Rome also includes 8 apps in our all-in-one virtual office super bundle. Apps like Magic Apps, which let you send a video clip to anybody you like, or Lobby, which lets you send a scheduling link out, and our AI Inbox, which lets you chat with anybody, groups, threads, replies, all powered by AI. Now, speaking of AI, over the next few years, every business is either going to become an AI business or be disrupted by one. And Rome is fully enabled by AI, starting with our AI note taker, Magic Minutes, so you can get a recap and prompt any meeting that you've been in. Everyone in Rome also gets an Audit, which is an AI assistant. You get your own AI assistant that can schedule meetings, that can follow up, that can send emails, that you can prompt about what you've had. You can chat with your AI, and they can do all kinds of tasks, all in the name of making you ultra productive for the future. Nobody knows what the future holds, but I do know this. It's going to be built in a Rome virtual office, hopefully by you.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, let's get those claps going. Hi, welcome to the Clean Food Forum. I want to apologize in advance if my camera cuts out. It's raining here in Southern California, and anybody who lives here knows that rain messes up everything in Los Angeles. So, but welcome. In case you don't know, the Clean Food Forum is a monthly executive roundtable featuring 4 or more experts in the industry. It is for the industry, by the industry, and always free. So welcome. I do want to introduce our guests today, our panelists. Should we bring them on one by one, Chris? First, you know what? Let me start with Chris. He is my wonderful co-host today. We met through a fellow colleague, and we just have so much in common on sustainability and food systems that we were like, let's host this thing together. So, Chris, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I want to share if I can. I just want to set the stage with your fun video that was so goofy. So I just want to share one more video while everybody's been so patient. But here we go.
Don't hate me, but if your lungs don't have main character vibes, what are you even doing? Protein air. Standard air is so mid. 250 grams of pure synthetic protein. Woohoo! My chakras are literally swole right now. This is the same air Wagyu beef breathes. It's so airy. This is literally the best air ever. I just can't. You need this vibe balancing protein air in your life. Protein air. Protein perfection.
The same air that Wagyu beef breathes.
That Wagyu beef breathes. Yeah, I'm nominated for an Oscar this year, guys. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, so Kelly, thanks for making that. That was fun. And I think it really sort of sets the stage for this conversation around proteins. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
So
and
let's bring our guests out here.
We have to have a sense of humor about it. Like we know it's here. We know that there's some tweaking that needs to be done, but it's a growing, burgeoning market, and it's going to be a ride. It's going to be a wild ride. I will not be surprised if we do see protein air come to market sometime soon.
We might. And, you know, I think maybe just for continuity, why don't we bring one guest out at a time? And since you know everybody so well, you can just sort of give the background so that folks have a better understanding of how balanced.
Sure. Well, since we're talking about CPG products, let's bring on Joe first. Joe Rotundo has just launched a brand new, better for you frozen dessert. It's in the dessert space. I'll let him tell you more about how it's made and what it's made with, but it's very rich in protein. And so I think today he'll be able to share some of his experiences about launching and going to market in a category that is already very competitive. So say hi, Joe.
What's up, everybody?
30 seconds on yourself, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. What's up? I'm Joe Rotundo. Thanks, Kelly and Chris, for hosting, and thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm the founder of Smearcase. We make high protein frozen cottage cheese ice cream. It's actually so low fat we can't call it ice cream, but there's 40 grams of protein in each container. It's powered by cottage cheese, boosted with collagen, and we'll be launching nationwide in Sprouts in just a week or so.
Yay!
I'm going to stick that in the chat for you guys so that you can, the website in the chat, so you can take a look while we're chatting.
Thank you.
Beautiful. We're going to keep it on the CPG trail, and we're going to introduce Lisa Young, who is a protein bar genius. She's a food scientist and turned protein bar expert. She has the most amazing LinkedIn posts like every single day. Makes me hungry. But why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your history and where you've landed now?
Yeah. So can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm a food scientist with product development experience. I started my career at General Mills, where I was a technologist and product developer. I primarily worked on snack and nutrition bars there. Today, I'm an R&D manager for a B2B ingredient distributor, Schooler Food Innovation. And in my role at Schooler, I help guide formulators on how to use plant proteins and other functional ingredients across many different applications, including bars, but also bakery, snacks, ice cream, beverages, pasta, you name it. And in addition to supporting the formulators, I also work with my team to scout out new ingredients across the globe to bring back to our customers to meet those consumer demands.
That is wonderful. You're going to have a very busy couple of years ahead of you, I have a feeling, because there's going to be lots of clean label reform going on. So thank you for being here today. Last but certainly not least, we have Lauren Handel, who, let me tell you guys, I saw her do a presentation about 2 or 3 weeks ago on label compliance, and I'm such a food geek, but it was amazing. She is like a wealth of knowledge. And as we not only reformulate and need to package and have this regulatory compliance for ourselves within the industry, we also need to be very cognizant of what these boxes and labels are saying that may not be giving us 100% of the correct information. So please welcome to the stage, Lauren Handel.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I hope my voice is going to hold up. I have a cold. I seem to always have a cold or be getting over a cold when I'm doing a presentation. But yeah, I'm a lawyer for food and beverage businesses, mostly brand owners of packaged food and beverage. And a lot of what I do is regulatory compliance around labeling and marketing.
You are amazing. And let me tell you guys, if you have any questions about what you see at the grocery store or for your own products, she's the person to go to. So with that said, Chris, my wonderful, capable co-host, do you want to kick it off and start the round robin a little bit?
I mean, maybe. My first question is just real simple. Like, as a systems thinker, I always kind of run to inputs and outputs and then capacity. How much protein can our body actually take in a day? And how much of that excess protein do we pee out? Lisa.
Jeez.
So I don't have the hard numbers on this. So I'm a food scientist, not a dietitian. So I'll set the stage with that. But from what I understand, it is really only about 30 grams of protein at one sitting. And so, when you're getting excess protein to that all in one sitting, my assumption is that you are just peeing it out, for lack of a better word for that. But what's interesting about the dietary guidelines that just came out is it really has actually focused or put more attention to spreading protein out across the day versus just saying you need X amount. Sure, it's increased the recommendation, but it's also really discussing a little bit more about the strategy and how you consume it, and that is across the day. So then you aren't just peeing it out, it's actually being absorbed.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love to hear too, Lauren, on that with labeling. There's a percentage of daily value associated with things too, right? So is any of that built into the nutrition label?
It's built into the nutrition label, yes. So there's a 50 gram % daily value for protein for the general population. And that is to the extent that percent daily value for protein is declared on the label, which is not always required. It is based on that 50-gram recommended daily value. That is not been changed by the dietary guidelines recommendation to significantly, in some cases, basically double or more that amount of protein intake. The rule hasn't changed. The regulation that sets those daily values has not been changed as a result of the new dietary guidelines.
Has the serving amount been changed? The recommended serving per day?
The dietary guidelines don't change the law in any way. They potentially have implications, legal implications only in respect to food programs that are built around dietary guidelines,
Right.
but they do not change anything about labeling law.
I put something in the chat for you guys to go through at some other point, but when I was doing my research for some of the posts for LinkedIn, this one was interesting about when they make the protein powders or fortify certain foods, how much of it is lost in the processing of it, and how much of the amino acids are kept. So that it's kind of a sidebar to what we were just talking about, but you guys can look that over later.
No, that's awesome, because I think, Joe, maybe you can, the processing part of it's huge, I would imagine, right? So as a CPG guy that's got a product out there, and you're talking about co-packing or processing, like how does that affect the protein value or quality, or does it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll be transparent. I'm not a subject matter expert in that, but like what I am passionate about, what I can speak to is, our goal at Smearcase is to make a minimally processed frozen dessert. This in this high protein boom, I think a lot of brands are just pumping protein in their products, calling them high protein. Whereas our goal was to arrive there holistically and naturally by having cottage cheese, milk, collagen in our product, and just all natural sugar. So you're getting that nutritional value, you're getting the benefits from those ingredients. And yeah, I've been at our manufacturing facilities, and without giving up too many trade secrets or IP, we do our best to make sure that it's not an ultra processed good, and making sure that every single ingredient in our product serves a unique purpose, and removing those that have no business being in there.
And I wanted to actually, before we get to what Aaron put in the chat, which is really valuable, and I want to have Lauren comment on that, I wanted to ask Lisa the same thing. Do you guys have to really consider the source and how it's processed and how much it's processed before you can even consider it for one of the products that you're developing?
Yeah, and so just to kind of answer the first question from Chris, so it's a great question. It's like, how much does it break down, or how does the protein actually change from just ingredient to finished product after processing? And really, the simple answer is formulators formulate that in, so they recognize that things can change, things can be broken down, and so the best practice really is to formulate a little bit higher than your goals, and then you do your testing on that finished product after it's been gone through all the processing. So you're baselining your nutrition facts panel up from that finished product, not from the formulation on the sheet. So it's really important that you give that extra 20% protein in there than what you're actually going to put on that label. And Lauren might be able to have some comments on that too, but yeah, that's recognized as a formulation hack in advance.
Explain to us how they sort of reverse engineer that. So how can you tell after it's all said and done exactly how many grams of something exists in the final product?
Yeah, so it's really about taking it to qualified testing labs to have it, the finished product tested for total protein content. And that's very common practice. Sometimes that's internal at some of the larger CPG companies. A lot of times it's third parties. And so especially when it's third parties, it's, nobody's going to fudge those answers. You just got to work with the results you get. And sometimes that means you have to reformulate because you learn that the processing that you put it through did break it down and it changed it. This actually happens a lot with like fibers and sugars, where you can break down, polysaccharides you can break down fibers into sugars. And so you have to go back and consider that.
Have you had any major challenges where you had to go back to the drawing board altogether because it just didn't hold up after the processing?
Yes, countless. But there's a lot of study, there's a lot of existing knowledge out there on all these processing systems, and so you kind of lean into what's already been learned and hope for the best.
Yeah, I always get people they ask like, "Oh, tell me about a time that you failed at your last position, whatever, right?" And I'm like, R&D is nothing but failure. It's all about taking the failure and learning from it and figuring out how to not fail so bad next. So, but Lauren, tell us about the language that people may or may not use on like during this whole new protein craze. What language we might see on the label that might be slightly misleading or that we just need to pay more attention to?
Well, when we're talking about protein content, that's in the category of nutrient content claims. So there's actually very specific rules around this. And the basic rule is you can only make such claims in compliance with the regulations. So whereas in many things in labeling and advertising, you're free to choose your words as long as you're being truthful and not misleading. In the context of nutrient content claims, that is not the case. There's specific language with definitions that are tied to percent daily value if you want to characterize the amount of protein as high or rich in or good source or excellent source. Those are all approved terms that have definitions based on percent daily value. Other than that, if you're not going to use language like that, then all you can say is the quantity grams of protein in the product, per serving or per container. I always encourage people to be really clear about, are you saying per serving? Or if not, then, what is that for? Is it for the entire container? Or something that consumers might not expect? So those are the rules. You can look them up and find them in 21 CFR Part 101. Where people get into trouble these days, especially, and for anyone who's not aware, trouble in this context hardly ever means regulatory enforcement. There's a lot of FDA rules that just don't get enforced very much by the regulators. They don't have the bandwidth to do it. It's not the highest priority. So that leaves lots of room for mostly class action plaintiffs lawyers to step in and essentially enforce the rules by going after allegedly false or misleading labeling and advertising. And specifically with regard to protein, a trip up area is in failure to strictly comply with the rules around how you declare, well, first of all, that you have to declare percent daily value if you make a claim about protein content. So I mentioned before, it's not always required to declare percent daily value for protein as it is for other nutrients in the nutrition facts panel.
Okay.
But if you make a claim about protein, then it is required. And I'm going to lean on Lisa to explain the technicalities of PDCAS better than I can, but PDCAS, protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, is how you determine how much of protein essentially is usable in the body, right? So not all proteins are the same. They differ in amino acid composition. They differ in digestibility. And plant-based proteins have generally lower PDCAS scores than animal-based proteins. And so figuring out percent daily value for protein is not as simple as saying X grams of protein divided by the 50 grams that you're supposed to get per day. You have to adjust that number, correct it based on digestibility. And so where brand owners have obviously not done that, either they've failed to include a percent daily value in the nutrition facts panel and they made a nutrient content claim about protein, or they've clearly not corrected it. They have all plant-based sources or mostly plant-based sources of protein, and they've not corrected that number in the percent daily value. And this gets to Aaron's question in the chat, is why is that daily value different from product to product? That's a red flag for plaintiffs' lawyers, that they haven't done that work, and that is allegedly false or misleading to consumers, and therefore the basis of a potential class action lawsuit.
This is where I geek out. This is where I'm like mesmerized by what you're saying, because if I'm hearing you correctly, I can say that there's 27 grams of protein in per serving in this package, right? But if I want to say it's X amount of your daily allowance, then I have to put what the percentage is of that daily allowance on the package. Otherwise, it's optional, right?
If you're going to say there's any amount of grams of protein outside the nutrition facts panel, then you have to put the percent daily value in the nutrition facts panel, and it has to be corrected for PDCAS.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm going to shoot this to Lisa, that would differ based on pea protein or lentils or some other kind of derivative of protein based on the PDCAS system.
Yeah, so each individual plant protein source has a different overall PDCAS, and it's not just all pea protein has this, all rice protein has this. It can even differ based off of how it's processed. So it's a very complex and very supplier and product specific value, and it's actually really expensive to get it tested. It's a very lengthy testing procedure that also it utilizes a rat, and it does it in its body essentially, as it determines on how it's being digested. And so a lot of brands, especially newer brands, aren't doing that full testing. They're relying on their suppliers to give to those values, and it's just not all readily available information, and so it becomes really complex, which is why you'll see that step skipped at times, especially if it's not being enforced. But also when you do apply that step, especially on proteins that have that lower PDCAS value, then you have to put more of that protein in to get that higher percent daily value.
Yep.
It becomes expensive, but it becomes a sensory issue, a performance issue in that product application. And so it's a big thing that we talk about it a ton, but generally there's kind of a few known I'll talk about plant proteins. So it's known that animal proteins essentially have the highest PDCAS score. So there's not a lot of issues with that, or like cottage cheese, dairy-based ones, super high. But when it comes down to plant proteins, the only one that really can compete truly would be soy-based proteins, because they're very high PDCAS. Then your next highest will be pea, and then it just kind of downgrades from there. There's something called complementary proteins. And so pea proteins, they're not at that one, you can add what's called a complementary protein that has a different amino acid profile to your formula to actually boost that PDCAS. So that's why you'll see, at least especially with these, maybe more like performance protein, sports nutrition type products that they're really getting targeting those really high PDCAS values. They'll combine the rice protein and the pea protein to get that overall higher percent daily value.
Because I would assume that rice also doesn't have a high sensory aspect to it as well. It can be a little more neutral and as filler, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually sometimes a benefit as well. So proteins are blended for many reasons. One being the PDCAS score to improve that, but also to balance cost, but also for functional performance. And so each of these proteins will have different functional attributes. No functional attribute is good or bad. For the most part, they all are different, and they all serve a different purpose within an application. So water absorption is a great example of one. We'll talk about it in the context of bars. If your protein has really high water absorption, then it's going to cause that bar to get really thick, chewy, dry very quickly. Now you need that protein. Let's say it's your pea protein that has that high water absorption. You need it because it has that high PDCAS value, but you want to balance that a little bit with a lower water absorption protein and maintain the total protein level. So you select one that's at a lower water absorption, and then you can kind of balance that out.
That's fascinating.
It's
I have a thousand questions. I know Chris wants to jump in here, so I'm gonna let you.
What a world we're living in. Joe, I have a question for you. Just to, you know, I'm on the regenerative ag side of things, and a lot of the folks that I work with are small local producers. And the dairy industry has been gutted on the small local ag side. So I'd love to talk with you just a touch about your product. I mean, it's cottage cheese based, which means that it's dairy based, which means that it's coming from a cow. So that all that seems to be good news because we're already in the higher value proteins. Talk to us a little bit about your supply chain. How is that working for you, and what can customers expect?
Yeah, I love this question. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about, sustainability, right? And I think what's unfortunate is that all these plant-based, I don't know if you can even call them milks anymore, sort of destroyed the dairy cattle farmers. And it was, by just pure full-on blitzkrieg marketing, the oat milks, the almond milks really did a number and really misled a lot of consumers. I call it health washing, right? You say almond milk is better than just a single ingredient dairy milk, and it's just complete BS, right? Because when those plant-based milks are stuffed with stabilizers and sugars and gums, like I'm not sure how 10 ingredients that I can't recognize are better than just one. But that's besides the point. At first we were producing everything in New York when we first started, and we have since switched to California, and now we're proud partners with the CMAB, the California Milk Advisory Board, and they represent over 1,200 family-owned farms in California. It's the marketing branch of these dairy cattle farmers, and they support farmers, they support brands, and they have marketing initiatives to promote the use and consumption of real California milk. So we are proud carriers of the Real California seal on our pints, and it's something I'm incredibly proud of. We go to California about once a quarter. We get to actually meet the generationally family-owned dairy farmers, and they're incredibly passionate about their animals. They're passionate about health. They're passionate about dairy. And California has so many sustainability initiatives for the production of dairy. They reuse, a lot of these farms reuse water multiple times in the life cycle. They're finding ways to get waste feed to feed their cattle. They're taken care of better than probably most people out there. And it's just cool to be a part of this great network. It's really cool to know the actual people that we're purchasing our dairy from, and to go to these facilities that are just world-class partners. It's really cool to see that that passion come through, because that passion gets poured into our product, and you can just feel that love when you're eating a pint of our Froco, knowing that there's nutritional value, and knowing that the dairy that's used is from people like you and me.
Yeah, I love that. They say the line that I keep hearing over and over again from small local producers is not what you are what you eat, but you are what your food eats.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different perspective, right? When we talk
100%.
about soy-based proteins, well, how is that soy derived? There's food grade, but then there's also an industrial side of this. So it's helpful to be very transparent, and you do see that a lot in truth and labeling. But then the marketing side of it, man, there's a lot of washing. So I appreciate that. Thanks for that answer, Joe.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's true. Happy cows, nutritional milk, or however the saying goes.
That's right.
Why did you choose cottage cheese? Tell me about that process. I mean, I know about how the texture would not lend itself to what most people would think is cottage cheese, but why don't you explain the process of how it's done?
Yeah, for sure. I was training for a marathon back in 2023, and there was, after a particular tough workout in sweaty New York City, I was just craving ice cream, and just I was at my local grocery store and just couldn't find an ice cream that was high in protein. And I couldn't find an ice cream that didn't have a million ingredients. I couldn't find an ice cream that wasn't loaded with sugar, calories, and fat. So my go-to healthy dessert at the time was cottage cheese, blueberries, and honey. And I just got to the point where I started to get the ick. The texture wasn't doing it for me anymore. And I just thought to myself, how is there no such thing as high protein ice cream? How has nobody brought frozen cottage cheese to market? So I just started making it myself. And I thoughtfully, I'm super passionate about health, wellness, and fitness. I'm a certified personal trainer, have studied on my own, diet and all of that. So every single ingredient I chose on purpose. And cottage cheese is just loaded with nutritional value. It's high in protein. It's low in fat. And I just thought, like, what better ingredient to use in a high protein ice cream than cottage cheese versus just a protein powder. So yeah, what's cool about our product is that it's truly performs and tastes like ice cream.
Yeah.
It's blended smooth. It's creamy. It's delicious, and what was important was every ingredient needs to serve a purpose and add to that, the macro profile. And we just wanted to approach it very holistically.
What are you using for sweetener, and is that sort of affecting the freeze process than say your traditional ice cream with just cream and sugar and milk?
Yeah, our goal was to make it as close to ice cream as possible. It's so low fat that we can't call it ice cream, so we call it Froco, frozen cottage cheese. And we intentionally use just raw cane sugar, no monk fruit, no stevia, no artificial sweeteners. And that was super important for us because, one, I personally hate the taste of monk fruit and stevia. And two, sugar is integral to the performance of ice cream. So yeah, that was a strategic and thoughtful decision we made, and customers really value that.
I think before I want to get back to Lauren in a second, but before I forget, I'm going to send you a YouTube video. It's quite embarrassing that I did about a year ago on ice creams, and it angers me, Joe, when I'm walking down the grocery store aisle and I find that all of the ice creams, it's corn syrup, not high fructose corn syrup, which potato, and it's like 5 different kinds of gums and carrageenan and monodicglycerides and like all of these stabilizers that basically just whip it full of air. And yeah, thank you. And I just don't think we should be spending, or they should be charging $8.99, $10.99 for 48 ounces of fluff. So I'm really happy to see that you're keeping it real. There are very few companies that can do that successfully, and I will just shout out to Haagen-Dazs, who's been doing that since the 80s, by the way. But thank you for being one of the newer additions to the market.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Lauren, do you want to answer that question that Aisha had in the chat about the FDA setting the daily standard?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, so there's a daily standard, the 50 gram per day daily value, recommended daily intake of protein. That is the standard, at least for purposes of food labeling, and individual needs will vary based on your, calorie needs. But that's the basic standard. I think, that question came up when we were talking about PDCAS, so I'm not sure. So maybe clarify the question.
Okay.
If I could ask Joe, I'm really curious because he's mentioned twice now it's got too little fat to call it ice cream. And just so people understand what that means, we have food standards in FDA regulations for not that many kinds of food, but for a number of categories of foods that have been around for a long time. There are these regulations that define what a food is, and that the purpose of that is to prevent economic adulteration, right? So their old rules and dairy products have food standards more than other kinds of foods. And the concern at the time was that we didn't want to deceive consumers by adding not so much fillers, but like cheap vegetable oils instead of dairy fat, which is more expensive. But what it's done is, this is still the law. And so you can't call a premium frozen cottage cheese ice cream if it doesn't meet the fat requirements. These days, well, I don't know. I guess people have very mixed views about fat. So I don't know if we want to get into that territory. But, at least most nutritionists seem to believe that saturated fat isn't great for us and we should avoid it. So it's kind of this strange situation of what do consumers expect when they see the word ice cream, and how do you convey that you have a premium product if you can't call it ice cream? Because all those whipped filler filled stuff, they call it frozen dairy dessert or non-dairy if it's non-dairy. But I'm just wondering what Joe thinks about that issue and how you convey that it's a premium, simple product without being able to call it ice cream.
Yeah, it was something that we thought a lot about, right? Like, how can we educate the consumer what Froco is, right? You have ice cream, you have Froyo, frozen yogurt, you have plant-based alternatives, and now you finally have frozen cottage cheese. I think what's really cool is that we've allowed social media to educate the consumers, right? People know that cottage cheese is healthy. People are already making cottage cheese-based ice cream at home. So, we're always looking at ways to tweak our packaging, making sure that we're calling things out, that, to comply with regulations, but also to market it effectively. I think at the end of the day, like, we're in the ice cream aisle and we're in a pint, right? So it looks like a pint of ice cream. So when you see it in Whole Foods, we're next to Jenny's, which helps, right? Because we're a bit more premium, we're a bit higher priced. And I think when consumers see that protein call out, they see it in the pint, they just see it as another frozen dairy dessert that you can take off the shelf. And on social media, we try to do a lot to show the texture and to really educate people, like, what does Froco mean? What does it stand for? And yeah, it's been a challenge, but I think the timing of it has been perfect in terms of, like, what social media is doing to help educate consumers.
So I have a question. I want to do a little bit of a reframe because part of this, I know Chef Kelly and I have talked about this, the simplicity of ingredients and the simplicity of recipes, the concept of salt, fat, acid, and heat in cooking, and then 5 ingredients or less. The Nova scale that's out there that is in terms of the level of process. I'm not very versed in this, but the Nova scale has been brought to my attention in terms of how much the product has been manipulated, I guess, so to speak. So can we maybe, Kelly, if you could sort of form a question out of that on the Nova scale and introduce maybe the listeners to what that is, and I'll
I
put the
think,
classification
yeah,
system in the
so
chat.
both the EU and Australia have their own food rating systems that determine, based on certain variables, how healthy or unhealthy it deems it to be for their citizens. And I mean, they've got the right idea, and I think we're leaning towards that direction. I don't know if anybody saw the 60 Minutes blurb over the weekend with RFK and oh God, his name escapes me, but he was in the Biden administration. He was head of the FDA. But how, they're sort of working together to minimize the amount of ultra processing that goes on in our foods, and actually define it. They can't really successfully say what their threshold is, because we have allowed too many additives across the board to enter into our food system, that it's going to be very hard for them to sort of catalog all of that and then determine which is the the worst offenders. I mean, I could tell you what the worst offenders are. I'll develop the America's FDA scale, but I think Lauren could talk about that too. That there is a very we love the FDA. We love the FDA, but there has just been this over the years less and less accountability. I think basically for what Lauren said, it's fear of taking a stance or a side. They don't want to represent the corporations too much. They don't want to represent the consumer too much. They say, you guys figure it out. And that has not been a very good system for us for the last 40 years. So I'm glad to see that it's starting to take shape. I'm hoping it sticks. But I think we should look to some of the other scales out there to determine how healthy or unhealthy a food is for us. I know Lisa and Lauren can chime in on this.
I'll start because I could talk about this all day, but I won't.
I know, right?
Yeah, this is just, again, like many things, it's all about trade-offs. It's if you want a low-fat ice cream or if you want a low-calorie light ice cream, you're going to have to introduce these additives to replace fat, to lower your calories. And so it's this, am I going to balance my diet based off of the macronutrients I'm getting, but still enjoy what I'm eating, or at least make, minor shifts to start into healthy habits? And by replacing my Haagen-Dazs full fat, wonderful, clean label, ice cream with my lower fat option, then those are the trade-offs I have to make and the decisions I have to make. I think what's unfortunate is, somebody like me who's aware of all this stuff can make those decisions confidently and know what trade-offs I'm making, but the general consumer doesn't have that same background in education to understand what trade-offs there are, what options are available. And so it's a lot to sort through. It's very complex. I think that it's a good thing that we're diving into this as a society and having, some accountability on what we're doing. I think the colors, the whole, removing colors is a good example of a great place to start, because colors don't provide any real functional value. They don't support any sort of shelf life or access or anything like that. They just increase palatability and it's not really something that's necessary. Now, there's a ton of other additives that are put in place because it's a specific reason. And it could be to make these products more affordable. It could be so that they can get to these small towns in the middle of, Arkansas. There's just all types of things that we're not recognizing. And it is a privilege to be able to eat cleanly and have the time to do that. So we want to be mindful of what some of these things also do for other populations.
Right.
But we need to organize that information and communicate it.
100%. Lauren, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess where I see this in my world popping up the most is that I'm just kind of following and waiting to hear what's going to happen with changes that have been hinted at by HHS with an FDA with respect to the GRAS rules, right? So generally recognized as safe is essentially a honor system for the industry to verify for itself that anything it puts into food is safe. And right now, for the vast majority of things that are used in food manufacturing, no notice is required to FDA, no pre-approval is required, as long as you've done this analysis and determined that what you're using is safe. And apparently there will be proposed changes to that system to at least provide a mandatory notice, is what I'm expecting from FDA. Some states are also proposing legislation. So New York has proposed legislation. California just this week proposed legislation for this. And, so that gets to one of the main concerns around highly processed foods, which is not defined anywhere. The dietary guidelines encourage Americans not to eat highly processed foods without exactly defining what that is. But one of the main concerns is that we don't exactly know what's in our food and whether or not it's actually safe. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the main issue in this area that I'm following.
I think the grass thing, and then I'll shut up because I could talk about this all day. I think the grass thing is one of the ones that bothers me the most because let's just call a spade. When you tell big food that it's okay for them to self-regulate, you open the door for a lot of shenanigans, and that's what's happened since about the mid 90s. But and I always say this: if Consumer Reports comes out and says no, we don't agree, that's when I go, you know what, we should listen because Consumer Reports tries to stay out of it unless they're really against something. And I just think that the ambiguity is just ripe with people not making decisions based on health, but making decisions based on profit instead. And I would like to see that change because I say this to people all the time when I try to pull back the curtain. It's a very ugly curtain to pull back. But the bottom line is you shouldn't have to be standing in the grocery store aisle for 45 minutes reading those ingredient labels, trying to decipher what they mean and why your kid has mood swings or why you're chronically fatigued. It's their mess and they should start to clean it up. That's the bottom line for me.
Yeah. And so much of my job is to continue to build those bridges between farmers and producers. And, like Joe could introduce me to his supply chain, in which case I could meet the farmer. When you know the farmer and you know how process, and Joe's a good guy because the farmer says Joe's a good guy, then that it's an A/B conversation, right? If you know your small local producer and you can see into the eyes of the protein that you might be consuming, that's as close to the metal, as they say in technology, as it gets, right?
Yep.
But there are so many different types of proteins, and there's so much that the food system has been optimized for profit and efficiency. So, marine powder proteins are not plant proteins, are not, mammal proteins. So I guess the question that I have that I always sort of go back to is it a general rule of thumb? Maybe Lisa, that maybe I'll start with you. Is less more? Like, can we just look at something and be like, I don't know what 9 of those are, so I'm just not, like 5 or less, and then move on? Like, is there a simple button? Because America loves simple buttons.
Simple answer is no. And that's where it gets really challenging because it's, even in the case of what we're talking about blending proteins, you might have 4 or 5 different proteins in one, say again, protein bar, just because they're all doing different things or they're coming in from different components of your product. So also keep in mind when you're looking at products that are multiple different products combined, like trail mix, for example. That's a really simple one. You've got a whole ingredient list for your pretzel. You've got an ingredient list for your M&M. You've got an ingredient list for your whatever
Peanut butter
it is.
chip, whatever it is.
Yeah. And so as brands start to innovate with kind of new formats and fun different ways of eating foods, you're just going to expand that ingredient list. It's like any sort of like frozen meal. That thing is endless. And it's just because you're combining several things, several different components into one packaged good. And so you just have to be mindful of all those different reasons to be for those things. I think that it's tough because we haven't had a lot of time to truly understand what some of these new ingredients that are more mainstream in our products are doing to us.
Yeah.
We have some theories, but it's just hard to tell. So it's all about, again, that trade-off and balancing it with the whole real foods with, obviously needing the packaged foods in your busy life and balancing that.
Right. Floor's open. Take it.
I'll just jump in. I see a question. What does the panel consider a clean protein? At the end of the day, single ingredient whole foods will always win. And like Lisa said, yes, they're not always available. They're not always convenient. But if, the perimeter of the grocery aisle is the safest place to shop, not going down the aisles. And if you do, look for the ones that don't have loads of ingredients. It's difficult. It's tough. Trust me. We all live busy lives, and we always don't have the time or the convenience to cook a meal or, pack a lunch. But single ingredient whole foods will always win. And I empathize with a lot of folks, because I have 1 gram of protein per pound of my body weight. I'm incredibly active. I have health goals, and it works for me. I've tested so many diets, and I think we live in the world of, I say, the world has become a New Jersey diner menu, where there's just so much thrown out there. Everybody's telling you, follow this diet, do this to be healthy. But at the end of the day, you need to know and understand what works for you, and you test that out. So I'm always looking for, like, what protein powder has less filler, no maltodextrin, no stevia or monk fruit. I just need pure whey or pure beef protein isolate, right? It's hard to find, but they're out there. ProMix, I see in the chat. ProMix is a great brand. Lineage Provisions is a fantastic brand. So I think at the end of the day, clean protein will always be your chicken breast, a steak, eggs, rice and beans to combine that. And simple, less is more.
Yeah. So we're rounding out towards the end of the show, believe it or not. It's almost 1:30 Eastern, so that was an hour fast.
Yeah.
There are a couple questions left. I think you guys really got to everything. ProMix, we got the one question for, of course, Lisa, everybody wants to know what the best protein bar is. You don't have to answer because they can do their homework. But what I heard, to recap, is you are what your food eats. Keep it simple if you can, right? And maybe just don't trust the fact that what you're seeing is what you're getting when it comes to a lot of the food. Do your homework. We've got a lot of resources out there now, and whether it's simple protein or whether it's ultra processed, there's a lot of science behind this. As a case in point, we have law and label and truths and all these things out there. So I know I appreciate this conversation being brought to the
Me
discussion.
too.
And the small local producers that are out there in America are struggling right now. So I'll continue over and over again to advocate for them. The closer you get to the source of your food, the more we're keeping health close to us. The nutritional value of what we're eating is at the farm. It's not in the lab. It's not in the grocery store. It's at the farm. So know your farmer. Go find a farmer and go meet that person and support them the best you can.
Yeah, to Lisa's point, we want to close that gap. And also, oh, look, I just froze. Yeah, and for people who are going to market with new protein-rich foods, do your homework. Don't make claims that you can't back up, and make sure that you're finding those nuances when you have to mix your proteins and they come out having a completely different gram total. So with that said, I want to thank everybody so much for coming. And Lisa, you kind of set me up. You teed me up. Our next Clean Food Forum will probably be 3 to 4 weeks from now. It will be about clean color. It will be all about going from synthetic dyes to natural ones. So I hope you guys can join us again, whether it's in the audience or on the panel. If there's anybody in the audience who wants to join the panel, you know where to reach me. And thanks for coming, you guys. Let me know if there's anything I can do. I'm here.
Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.